All right, so I want to try to take you guys through a few different mash nodes today. Mm. Nothing too complicated here. I just kind of want to explain some details about some cool mash nodes, and that will help you sort of get cool looks to your animation. So let's just do something simple here. We'll create a torus shape. I'm going to make this. What I have in mind for this is kind of like chainmail. So I do want to make it fairly large here, something like that, with plenty of space inside so we can get kind of like looping chain rings. So something like that's probably good. I'm going to go ahead and delete my history. Actually, I'm not going to delete the history. I want to keep this. I want to keep my input node here for my shape in case I do want to alter it later. So I'm not going to delete my history. And I don't have any transforms to delete, so I'm just going to leave that as it is for now. Everything's still in the origin. So we'll go to Mash. We'll go ahead and create our Mash network, and we'll look at our nodes here. So we have our Mash distribute node. That's pretty, it's controlling how things are distributed. So we can do something like that. We could begin to interlock them a little bit like that. And let's go ahead and increase our distance up to something like 60 so we get fairly large and see if we can get them to sort of interlock a little bit. Obviously, I don't want them to go into the center because then there'll be another ring sort of interlocking there. So I don't want to do that. We can begin to rotate a little bit, but you'll see how that rotates sort of like it increases the rotation of it. So that's not necessarily what we want. So I'm going to leave the rotation for it till later. And now I could go in here and just say, instead of a linear distribution, I could say, let's do a grid and try to get them to interlock that way. But that's not really going to give us the sort of result we want. That's just going to give us a grid. They're not going to interlock in a way like actual chainmail would. So if this were actual chainmail, there would be like these guys would interlock, and then there'd be a ring right here. So we'll set this back to linear, and what we're going to do instead is create a pattern or a replicator node. So replicator nodes are good for a lot of things. One thing they're good for is say you have a multiple objects and you have them sort of uh, spaced out in a way that's nice, but you want to have sort of duplicates of those being spaced out. So let me we'll go on a little tangent. We'll continue on with the chainmail here in a minute. But say we have multiple objects. So say I come in and let's do something really quickly where we create let's go to poly modeling. Let's create another torus here. So I guess this would be another sort of type of chain link if we do this correctly here. And I'm actually going to move this one off to the side. So it's like that. So we'll actually move it 4 units exactly. Actually, let's move it a little bit further. Let's move it 6 units, 5 units. Yeah, 5 units works good. and then say we want this to be included in our mash node here. So we'll go to our mash node, we'll go to our repro node, and then just throw that other torus in there. Now, in order to get multiple nodes to work, of course, we're going to need to create an ID node. So we'll do that, create an ID node. And now we see that that's sort of giving us the result that we wanted. I probably should have deleted the transforms on that one, but let's say we set our ID count to 2. We want our replication to be linear. We'll go to our distribute and just say we want 1 point. So we just want that to be duplicated once. So say you have this and you have this, maybe you have another object in here too, and you have this set up the way you want, but you want lots of them. So that's one way you can use your replicator node. And this actually looks like it might work out well, but you'll see what I mean here in a few minutes. Even though we're going to be using this on one object, you can use it on multiple objects to sort of get the result that you want. But in the meantime, we're going to let's go to our repro node, and let's go ahead and delete that other torus there. We'll delete that one. And let's go back to where we were. So we can actually, let's open up our mash editor and let's get rid of that ID node there. We don't need that just yet. We'll go back to our distribute node and increase our number of units again. Let's do 10. All right, so then what I want to do is add a replicator node. So replicator node, really cool, can do a lot of really neat things with this. If we just go ahead and add this, you'll see that nothing happens right away, but we do get a replicator node in our mash editor. And if we begin increasing the number of replicants, we get duplicates. So basically this is, at this point, this is doing the same thing that setting our distribution node to grid would do, right? But what makes the replicator node really neat is that you can come down here to pattern. And what this will do is basically make your pattern, it's kind of like the pattern feature in Illustrator. Well, it will offset your objects a little bit. So we can go to pattern and say we want it just 2. So we want it to be offset by 2, and we'll go to X. So X offset. And we can begin offsetting this. Probably, it looks like our circle or our torus here is 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4.5 units. So we'd probably want this set to either 4.5, or let's try 9 is a little much. Let's try 4.5. So that looks about right. That actually looks pretty close. So we can begin, we don't want to offset it in Y at all. Let's go back up to our regular position settings here, and let's mess with our position Z settings. That's kind of about what we're aiming for here. Then we can go ahead and increase that. If we want that to be more that way. And you see how it's offset. So we're getting that actual sort of chain ring, uh, chainmail type thing happening. And then if we want to increase it more in this direction, that's going to be our distribute node. So we'll probably need to do some more fiddling there with our distance and our number of replicants. So the reason that it didn't look quite right to us, it had a weird pattern, is because that wasn't quite offset the way that it should have been. You know, it wasn't, this point wasn't right in the middle like this point is. So we can tweak that a little bit. I do want them to have a little bit of gap there, so maybe something like that. And then we can go back to our replicator and go to our offset here and maybe tweak that a little bit too, so it's something along the lines of that, giving us sort of like a repeating pattern happening there. So that's kind of neat. That doesn't give us quite our chainmail look yet that we're looking for. We need to actually rotate these chain rings a little bit. Now we can try doing this with a node. It's probably going to be best just to go in with our actual original object and rotate it around a little bit. But let's see if we can do this with a node. Let's go and create a orient node and see that that kind of does an interesting thing. We may want to move this down below our replicator node. So we'll take a look here. Yeah, orient may not be the one that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and delete that one. Let's see if we have anything else here that may help us a little bit. I don't think so. We could probably try going to our original distribute node and looking at our rotate settings here. But remember, that's going to rotate sort of increasingly rotate them rather than rotate them all to uniformly. Now, there may be a way for us to rotate them all uniform. But I don't see it unless it's in our replicator node. Oh, we do have, let's try that. We have a pattern rotation. So that's sort of giving us the look that we want, but we actually want all of them to be rotated, not just half of them, which this is kind of just rotating half of them. So let's go and try to just maybe rotate our original object around. So I'm just going to select that. And if we just rotate it, it should sort of rotate everything because we still have history on that. So I want to rotate these in a way they're all going to be sort of interlocking if I can. That might not be possible with. So we may need to use like a pattern of or a combination of replicating or rotating them in our replicator. And then actually rotating the objects too. And now I believe we're starting to get that interlocking ring thing happening. So this is something that you may need to go back and forth and tweak quite a bit to get this right. So that looks good. I think we just may need to go into our distribute now and maybe bring them closer together. Or increase the number. So that links them this way, but not the other way. Anyway, so this is basically something that we can sort of tweak until our heart's content, until we have this looking like a chain pattern that we want. And I don't know how far I'm actually going to go with it here. I just kind of want them all to be interlocking for the most part. So I think if I just bring them a little closer together, like that, now they're all sort of interlocking, probably 1.5. Yeah, so now it looks like they're all pretty much interlocking. Nice. Now, again, I can make this much bigger. If I want a really easy way to make this bigger, just go up to replicants and we can increase that all the way up to 100. It gets a little bit more sort of difficult if we do it in our distribute node here, but here's where this replicator becomes super useful. We have our replication going. If you look at a replicator, we have it going offset. We'll make this an even -3 in the Z position. Say I want to be able to control it sort of repeatingly in this direction the same way we have it controlling repeatingly in that direction. Well, that's easy. All I need to do is go to our distribute node and we'll knock this down to just 1. So we have sort of one chain link of rings. And then I can make another replicator node. And this one, instead of going in our Z position, we'll knock that down to 0. We'll go in the X position. So let's go ahead and increase our number of replicants there. Probably way too many, bogging down the system a little bit. But we need this to be probably something along the lines of what that was. So let's try, like, instead of -3 going in the other direction, we'll just do 3. So it may need to be a little bit higher than that. Yeah, so something like that. So now we have a controller that's gonna, and we can name these too. So we can say replicator Z. So just put a Z at the end of that. Oops. Replicator Z. And this will be replicator X. And now we can control this in a repeating fashion rather than in a way that wouldn't repeat like we were working before. So replicator node, super important, super cool. You can do a lot of neat things with this. So the other node I want to talk about briefly here is maybe more than one. We'll see if we have time. I don't want to go over 40 minutes or anything, but I've had questions about looping noise. So if you wanted to do some sort of looping animation, we can do that with the signal, and there is a loop setting for the signal. So we'll just go ahead and add a signal node, and these I probably want to really tweak these quite a bit if I'm just using my basic 4D noise. We can go ahead and hit play and see that those guys are animating. There's a lot of them. So it may be beneficial for me for now to really decrease the number. So maybe let's just do 20. And 10, something like that, just so we can get a really quick response and playback of our signal animation. You see that works a lot faster now. So there's a looping noise setting in here. So we can go to looping noise and see that looks quite a bit different. It's very slow. We can change that. We can increase our position here and we can increase that a little bit. I'm just going to set this back down to like, let's do maybe something like 2 in all of these. So they're all just moving a little bit, or maybe not. Maybe let's put them all at 1. See, it's not moving much, but we can affect things like the noise scale. So we can begin increasing that. We also have a scale up here. This is scale of the individual objects. I don't really want to randomize that. I could probably do rotation a tad. So obviously I don't want to rotate them too much because then I'm going to be messing up my sort of interlocking pattern that I have. And then I have my noise settings here. So this is only going to be active if you're on your looping noise. And we're talking specifically on how to get a looping animation, right? So we can change our number of octaves, and that's going to give us a slightly different animation there as well. And then same with presence is going to give us a different animation. So lots of different things that we can set here. And notice that as this just plays through, let's sit here and watch this. There's no bump in our animation, right? It doesn't like snap back to the beginning. It's very smoothly just looping all the way over from the beginning or the end to the beginning. Now, if I change my frames here, so let's change this to something like instead of 100 frames or 120 frames, let's go with 100 frames and play that. We'll see a little snap happening at the frame 100. And that's because we have this setting here called loop frames. So this is basically controlling when those when that animation is going to loop all the way back around to the beginning. So, so if I set this to 100, now I'm not going to get a snap in my animation. I'm going to get a very smooth loop happening. So this is how you create looping noise. This is how you can do an animation that is going to loop in on itself. So you just have it replaying over and over and over again, and you never see a gap or a jump between the end and the beginning when it loops over. And we can, begin increasing, tweaking our settings even more now. So if we want these to kind of jiggle around quite a bit more like that, we can as well. So you get some pretty neat animations here just through like looping. I see some areas where they're kind of, some of the shapes are kind of going through, like right here, kind of going through. So I may want to decrease one of my rotations a little bit. So I think that's Y rotation. So yeah, some very cool effects we can get using our pattern settings in our replicator node. Now, what's some other quick nodes that we can talk about here? Most nodes are going to have a fall off object. So this is very useful. Let's go ahead and crank up our numbers here so we have some to work with. So basically, most nodes are going to have this fall off object node. So if we go to our signal here, what we can do with this is we can create a fall off object. So we can just right click in here and say create. And what we're going to get is this sort of locator sphere thing happening. Now this we can scale up and down, and we can move around. And this is basically going to create where that node is going to happen in an area of fall off. So if we say scale it down a little bit, see that we're only getting that animation happening in that area. So that can give us a pretty neat effect too. We can really control how that's falling off. Now your fall off node does have its own attributes, so we can set this to um, other shapes. You can make it a cube, a mesh. So if you have a mesh in mind, you can control the inner zone and the outer zone of that fall off. So to say maybe I want the fall off to stop here, but I want it to sort of slowly fall off from here. We can change the ramp. So all kinds of neat settings we can change. You can see that the outside rings here now are not falling off or not moving around with our signal, but the inside rings are. So maybe let's go in and decrease that inner zone a little bit. And this can all we can get really close here and sort of fly through this with our camera if we want to give us an interesting look. And all this is keyable, all this is animatable. We can change our mode here to add or remove. So what else do we have here that we can look at really quick is we have a symmetry node. Let's take a look at that. That's just going to give us symmetry. So say I want to mirror my animation or my mesh network along a certain axis. Um, Currently, it's being mirrored on the x-axis. We could mirror it on the y. And we could probably those around a little bit. I was thinking perhaps we could offset that a little bit, but I don't really see an offset. There is this offset position here. Um, Playing. Let's see if we just move our entire mesh network down. What happens? Nothing. All right. Let's see if we move our original object down. Nothing happens. Let's go back to our original distribute node. Hopefully we can. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. So center distribution, and then we can offset those a little bit. And this will give us like a really neat, if we wanted to fly through something like that, that gives you kind of a neat symmetry thing happening. So the symmetry is a cool one too, very simple. A lot of these nodes, I would say, are very simple. You shouldn't be afraid to use any of them. There is great documentation for all of them. We could also add a random node in here, an influence node. Influence node is basically the same thing as your Falloff node or your Falloff modifier on your objects. But maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. I'm still going to try and get to things like using points and trails and things like that with your objects. But one thing at a time. I just kind of wanted to go over mainly in this video the replicator node, but also some of the other really neat nodes you can use in conjunction with that. You can see that if you sort of animate the camera here. Let's go to select camera. Get like this really neat flights happening. That moves a little too fast. We could definitely slow that down, moving our keyframes around. And of course, that will mess up your loop, your looping animation. So you couldn't do that with a looping animation, but see that you can really quickly get some really good results with that. So I also plan on going over the color node, how to get that to work with Arnold materials, because it isn't as easy as just using it. I'll go over some rendering. Hopefully I'll go over the denoise feature a little bit. That's going to make your renders a lot faster using a denoiser. And if you guys have any questions on how to do specific things, let me know and I'll try to cover those as well.